Hey everyone, welcome to the investor.bet AFL Round 10 betting review video. Here we're going to go through all 9 games from the weekend. We're going to break them down from a betting perspective. Where did the money go? Who covered the spread? Did the games go over or under the total? And we're also going to look at what led to the teams winning the games and teams losing games and any trends that have appeared for these teams over the past few weeks in particular. Later in the week, I'll be previewing all the games for round number 11 as well, so stay tuned for that video. Through round 10, 6 games went under, 3 games went over, so a good weekend for the unders. Now, overall in the season, 49 games have gone under the closing total and only 40 games have gone over. This is exactly what the betting companies want it to be. Home teams won 5 of the 9 games. Home teams covered 5 of the 9 games. So that means that right now home teams are 47-42 against spread overall in the season. Favorites won 6 of the 9 games. The underdogs who won their games outright were Fremantle beating GWS by 34 points. Then also Melbourne beating the Brisbane Lions by 11. And then West Coast getting their first win of the season, beating St Kilda by 28 points. Underdogs covered 6 of the 9 games. That means only 3 favorites covered the spread. They were Sydney covering against Carlton, then also Geelong covering against Port Adelaide, winning that game by 76 points. And then, of course, the Western Bulldogs as they beat Essendon by 91. Overall in the season, underdogs are 45-44 against the spread. So there's +1 in favor of the underdogs if you're backing every underdog to cover the spread compared to backing every favorite, but hardly anything between the two of them. First game of the round, Gold Coast up in Darwin, kept their winning streak going. They've now won 8 straight up there, and they've scored 104 or more in 7 games. They won, but Hawthorn covered the spread. Gold Coast were $2 into $1.60 here, and the game went over the total. And I don't know how, but for some reason this total came down from 184.5 down to 182.5. Gold Coast are now 7-2 on the season, and Hawthorn, even though they lost this game, they still covered the spread, and that was their 3rd straight game where they've covered the spread. They're now 7-3 ATS on the season, which is the same as their win-loss record. Firstly, looking at the timeline for this game, the Suns got the jump on them. They kicked 5 of the first 6 goals and led by 20 points at quarter time. Hawthorn, though, won the second term. They kicked 5 goals to 4 and bridged the margin back to 14 points. Hawthorn then won the third term as well, kicking 5 goals to 2, and that put them in front. This goal here to Blake Hardwick put Hawthorn in front at the 3/4 time break. But Gold Coast won the 4th term, kicking 5 goals to 3 to run out 8-point winners overall and keep Hawthorn to the exact same score that Gold Coast keep the Western Bulldogs to last week. Statistically, for this game, Gold Coast had 24 scoring shots to 21, even though both sides had 59 inside 50, so Gold Coast were slightly more efficient going inside 50. Suns dominated the clearances 50-35 overall, both at the center 19-10 and at the stoppages 31-25. Turnovers, this was a pretty high turnover game, both sides around the 70 mark, 72-69. I think with this game, the difference largely, aside from the venue factor, Hawthorn without Gunston, Impey, Bruce and Meek was probably the difference in the 8-point margin here. And with those players in the side, particularly Gunston is probably and Impey the main 2 important, and Meek in the ruck definitely makes a major difference. Gold Coast are down to Melbourne this week to play St Kilda. That'll be at Marvel Stadium. And Hawthorn are back to the MCG to play the Brisbane Lions, who they have a very good record against. They've won the last 5, so we'll cover more of that in the preview video for this weekend's games. The Swans beat Carlton 78-62. Sydney won and covered, but were $1.58 out to $1.63. And the game went under the 162.5 total, which moved down from 163.5. Sydney have now won 2 of their last 3 games, sit at 4-6 on the season. Their last 3 games have gone under the total, and 7 of their last 9 have also gone under. Carlton have lost 2 of their last 3 now. 9 of their 10 games this season have gone under the total. Carlton led this game for the first 3 quarters. You can see they pretty much held like a 1 to 2 goal margin throughout basically those quarters. Every time they got out to about a 2-goal lead, Sydney kicked the next goal to bring the margin back. For this game, in the 4th term, so last quarter, the Swans kicked 5 goals to 2 and basically to steal the game away from Carlton. Overall this season, Carlton have really been a good first half side and let games slip away, and that pattern continued here. For the Swans, statistically in this game, they had 23 scoring shots to 17 from virtually the same inside 50s again, 53 to 54. Carlton were only +1. Swans won the clearances 45 to 36, both at the centre and at the stoppages. Even though they won the clearances and were winning the ball, they still trailed in inside 50s, which is interesting. And this was a game where there was basically no points scored from stoppages. Definitely in this area here, and like you can see the hit outs as well, Carlton really missing Tom De Koning. High turnover game, if we get down to the turnovers here, 75 to 73. Sydney outscored Carlton's 51 to 33 from turnovers, and it could have been more with those 51 points for Sydney being 7 goals and 9 behinds. The Swans travel to the MCG to play Melbourne this week, but they do have a 9-day rest going into that game and will have a 2-day rest advantage over Melbourne, who played on Sunday at the Gabba. And Carlton have GWS at home this week, which will be followed by the bye. Collingwood beat the Crows 78 to 68, so a 10-point margin. Collingwood won, but Adelaide covered. The Pies were $1.44 out to $1.50, and the game went under the 167.5 total, which moved right down from 175.5. Significant total movement on this game, but it moved in the right direction. Back wins for Collingwood, 8-2 on the season, but have failed to cover the spread in 2 of their last 3 games. Adelaide are now 0-3, so they've lost all 3 games when they're an underdog this year. Last 5 games to them have gone under the total. They are 7-3 against the spread though, so still beating the current odds. Timeline for this game, Collingwood led most of the game, except for a few key moments here and there. Adelaide got in front late in the first quarter, then they got back in front through a Darcy Fogarty goal midway through the second. They also got the lead through Jake Saligo goal midway through the third term. But it was this period here where Collingwood kicked 4 straight goals late in the third quarter, early in the fourth. That sealed the game. Adelaide tried to make a little bit of a comeback here. Fogarty goal, Dawson goal. It was back to around a 10-9 point margin with enough time for them to win the game, but in typical Collingwood fashion, they shut it down and win another close game. There were 23 scoring shots to 18 in favour of Collingwood in this game for just a 10-point margin, so you'd expect Collingwood to win by slightly more than they did. Adelaide were +8 inside 50, 55 to 47. However, 5 less scoring shots, even though they had more entries. So Collingwood's defensive efficiency helped them get over the line in this game, which has been a strength of theirs this season. Collingwood also going forward were very efficient, 23 scores from 47 entries. Adelaide were +10 overall in clearances, +3 in the centre, +7 at the stoppages, but 0 goals from stoppages in this game for Adelaide. And Collingwood were 1 goal 7, 13 points from stoppages. It's another game where teams couldn't score from the stoppages. A big factor for this game, and ultimately what cost Adelaide the game, were 89 turnovers. It resulted in 67 points for Collingwood and +24 compared to the points that Adelaide generated from Collingwood's 74 turnovers. And that was the difference in the game that got Collingwood over the line. The Magpies will play North Melbourne at Marvel this weekend, and Adelaide have the West Coast Eagles back at the Adelaide Oval. Geelong 115 to 39, 76-point winners over Port Adelaide. Geelong covered the spread. They're $1.65 into $1.60, and the game went under the total, which moved from 179.5 down to 175.5. And any games where like a team only scores 40 points or less than 40, it's very hard to get an over in that situation. This was Port Adelaide's 3rd straight loss. They are 4-6 on the season. They've failed to cover 3 of their last 4, and their last 3 games have gone under the total. Geelong now sit at 6-4 on the season. They've covered the spread in 7 of 10 games. The first half of this game, super low scoring, just 57 points in total. Geelong led by 9 points at the halftime break. And this was a game where for our bet in this game in the Best Bets membership, we needed 153 points scored. And thankfully, it got there in somewhat miracle fashion. Jeremy Cameron marked gold with just under a minute to go, and then they were able to break away from a contest in the middle of the field, and he kicked another goal as the siren went, which pushed us over the total. A game where it looked like we weren't going to get the win worked out good, so in that situation, I'm happy to take that moving forward. Statistically for this game, like Geelong kicked 14 of the final 16 goals. So after halftime, this game was all Geelong. See, Port Adelaide just kicked 2 goals, 3 after the break, whereas Geelong kicked 12 goals, 10. So massive difference between the two sides. 30 scoring shots to 14, so more than double the scoring shots for Geelong. The Cats were 58 to 43 inside 50, so plus 15. They're also plus 13 overall in the clearances, plus 4 at the centre, plus 9 at the stoppages. This was a big area where the scores came from. Geelong was 62 to 14 in scores from stoppages. Turnover-wise for both sides, fairly low, both under their averages, and not a great deal between them. Geelong outscored Port Adelaide 52 to 25 in scores from turnovers, and marks inside 50. Port Adelaide only had 5, which they average on the season 12.3. A really low number for them. Port Adelaide will face Fremantle in Perth, so it doesn't really get any easier. Fremantle are a bit of an up and down side, and always know what you're going to get from them. And Geelong have a really good game. They're on a quick turnaround, same as the Western Bulldogs, who also played on Saturday. It's a 5-day turnaround for both sides for the Thursday night game, which will be very good. I'm really looking forward to that game. Fremantle beat GWS 95 to 61 as underdogs here. They covered the spread and were $2.80 out to $3.50, so no money at all for the Dockers. The game went under the total, which moved down from 174.5 down to 172.5. GWS have now lost 4 of their last 5, and the only cover as well was in the game that they won. Fremantle ended a back-to-back loss streak, now sit at 5-5 on the year. 3 of their last 4 games have gone under the total. GWS kicked the first 2 goals of this game, were looking somewhat good at that point, but Freo worked well to get the momentum. They kicked the next 3 goals from that point and led by 11 points at halftime in what was a pretty low scoring half, similar to the Geelong Port Adelaide game, just 69 points being scored in the first half in this game. But after halftime, Freo kicked 3 goals, 5-23 to no goals, 0 and 5 behind for GWS in that third term. That pushed it out to a 29-point margin, and from that point, GWS needed to be first to score in the fourth term. However, Fremantle kicked the first 3 goals, which sealed the game for them, and they ran out 34-point winners in the end. Both teams were pretty inaccurate here, 8-13, 13 goals, 17, but 30 scoring shots to 21 in favour of Fremantle. It was a pretty low disposal game, in particular for GWS. This is an area they're really good at, is generating high disposals, particularly in handballs, where they only had 128 in this game. Fremantle did well to shut that down. They were plus 11 in inside 50s, which contributed to their more scoring shots as well. Fremantle also plus 11 in clearances, particularly at the centre, 15 to 8. A bit of a domination in the middle there. Stoppages, Fremantle outscored them 37 to 11. And whilst turnovers were low and even, both sides around the 55 mark for turnovers, Fremantle outscored GWS 58 to 48 from turnovers. GWS have an interesting game this week against Carlton, an important game for both teams, and Fremantle back at home against Port Adelaide to see if they can keep their momentum from that win going back over in Perth. Biggest win of the round, Western Bulldogs beat Essendon 127 to 36, 91-point margin, and it was a domination from the very beginning in this game. You see, the Western Bulldogs kicked the first 9 goals of the game, and it was basically over at quarter time. They're leading by 42. Then they also went on and kicked 14 of the first 16 goals when you continue on through the match, and led by 75 points at 3/4 time. And in the final term, they kicked 4 goals to 1 to win by 91 points. Bulldogs obviously covered the spread as well as favourites. They're $1.28 into $1.24. The game went under the total, 176.5, which moved up to 177.5 through the week. So the movement on the total was incorrect. The Western Bulldogs have now won 4 of their last 5 games and covered in all 4 wins. And Essendon, this was their biggest loss of the season and have failed to cover the spread in 4 of their last 5. Also, 6 of their last 7 have gone under. Scoring shots 37 to 11, more than triple the scoring shots, almost 500 disposals for the Western Bulldogs. Bailey Dale had 49 of his own. Inside 50, 61 to 37, so plus 24. Centre clearances, though, were fairly even, but clearances plus 8 overall. Stoppages 23 14. Bulldogs outscored them 43-13 in scores from stoppages. Both sides had fairly low turnovers. Essendon making 64 turnovers. Western Bulldogs outscored them 82 from those 64 turnovers to just Essendon managing 22 points from the Bulldogs, 55 turnovers. Bulldogs will face Geelong at GMHBA on Thursday night. They have the bye after that, which will be followed by Hawthorn. So a couple of good tests coming up for the Bulldogs. Essendon will play Richmond on Friday night this week in a game that's just about a must-win for Essendon after this kind of performance. Speaking of Richmond, they went down to North Melbourne by 4 points in the first game on Sunday. Richmond covered the spread though in this game, and North Melbourne were $1.72 into $1.54. The game went under the 171.5 point total. Richmond still sit at 3 wins on the season. Their last 6 games have gone under. North Melbourne, this was their second win of the year after a draw last week against Brisbane Lions. They failed to cover the spread though in this game after covering the spread in their 3 games prior. So when they actually win, they don't cover, which seems strange. This was their 3rd straight game to go under as well. North Melbourne got away to a really good start. They kicked 5 of the first 6 goals in this game, but Richmond stopped the momentum, got it back, and then kicked 5 of the next 6 goals themselves. And you can see it was locked together midway through the second term. Richmond went a point in front, and then late goal in the first half to Cameron Zurhaar put North Melbourne to ensure that they led at every break throughout the game. In the second half, it was pretty much close through that second and third term. And then North Melbourne, after Richmond hit the front early in the fourth quarter, North Melbourne kicked the next 2 goals. They responded to Camden McIntosh's goal with quick goals through Nick Larkey and Jack Darling. And from there, they were able to hold on in a fairly low-scoring fourth quarter. Richmond had 1 more scoring shot, so it was 19-18. So North Melbourne's efficiency and accuracy ultimately was the difference here. Richmond were +4 in inside 50s in what was a pretty low, these sides already average low inside 50s, but you would expect they'd still get slightly higher than this in a game going up against each other, so a little bit weird. North Melbourne dominated the clearances here, +21 at the centre, 14-4, +11. Off this, they really should have won this game more. And also, it's very surprising with this much domination at the stoppages that they didn't actually have more inside 50s than Richmond. So that's concerning against better quality opponents. North Melbourne were +10 in points from stoppages. Richmond only made 47 turnovers and North Melbourne made 63. However, even with a 16 differential in their favour, Richmond were only +6 in scores from turnovers. So they really could have won this game based off capitalising on North's turnovers, but weren't able to do it. 22 tackles inside 50. That's a really good start there for Richmond, but not enough for them to win the game. They'll play Essendon on Friday night with a 1-day rest disadvantage. North Melbourne will play at Marvel this week against Collingwood in what will be a tough game for them. Melbourne went up to the Gabba and beat the Brisbane Lions by 11 points. They had 29 scoring shots to 23. They covered the spread as big underdogs here and obviously won the game as $5.75 odds. They drifted out from the $5.25 early in the week. The game went over 172.5, which moved down from 177 during the week. Brisbane Lions have now only won 2 of their last 5 games. Obviously, there's a draw in there as well. And only covered 3 of 10 games this season. Bookmakers definitely giving them a little bit too much credit. They're obviously winning majority of their games, but just not winning them by big margins that they're needing to in order to cover the spread. Melbourne have now won 4 of their past 5 games, only losing to Hawthorn last week. Brisbane led for the first 3 quarters. Melbourne kicked the first goal, but from that point, it was pretty much all Brisbane. I think it's important to highlight here, Brisbane had this run where they kicked 4 straight goals at this period, but they weren't quite able to go on with it. Melbourne got 2 goals back and didn't let the game get out of hand. It got out to about a 24-point margin, and it was at this point where Brisbane could have kicked the next 2 or 3 goals and really put the game away, but they weren't able to. Every time they got out to a 20-point margin, Melbourne brought it back and always kept the game within range, and then ended up dominating the fourth quarter. They kicked the first 4 goals, as you can see right there, and then important to note, they also had 12 scoring shots to 2 in the last quarter. So Brisbane just the 1 goal and 1 behind. Melbourne had 4 goals and 8 behinds. And ultimately, could have almost won this game by more had they been more accurate in the fourth quarter. 29 scoring shots to 23. As I said, Melbourne could have won this game by a little bit more than they did. Melbourne were +5 inside 50s. They were also +5 in the clearances, but particularly the centre bounce where they are +7. Scores from stoppages in this game were even. Turnovers were fairly even, though Melbourne did outscore Brisbane 62-48 in scores from turnovers. Brisbane in this game really relied on scores from their defensive half. They scored 58 points that originated from their defensive half compared to just 16 points which originated from their forward half. Generally, you see the exact opposite of that. So when Brisbane went forward, they weren't able to turn in points, relied on working the ball around from their defensive half, which does make it hard to win games if you can't capitalise on your opportunities when you go inside 50. Brisbane go down to Melbourne this week to play Hawthorn, and then Melbourne are back at home to the MCG to play the Sydney Swans. And then final game of the round, West Coast Eagles got their first win of the year, 108-80 over West Coast. You knew they were building to it, and this was a game where they had a really good shot doing it. They won and covered the spread. They were 350 into 320, and the game went over 169.5 as the total, and only went over due to 76 points being scored in the fourth quarter. West Coast started the game well. They kicked the first 2 goals of the game and ended up leading at every change. St Kilda never led this game at any stage. From late in the first quarter, so right here to midway through the third quarter, West Coast kicked 6 goals to 2 during that period, which helped them build a good enough margin to lay the platform to win this game. As I said, it was a super high scoring fourth quarter, but West Coast never let the Saints get back within less than 2 goals. There was a little bit of worrying signs here, like from midway through in that third quarter, St Kilda kicked 4 of 5 goals during that period, and they were within range, but West Coast responded well, kicking 4 of the next 5 goals to make sure that they got the job done in front of their home fans. The Eagles had 28 scoring shots to 20, so the margin definitely reflects that, though they were only +5 in inside 50. So good to see at least West Coast win an inside 50 count overall, particularly when they were -55 in disposals. That shows they were more efficient. St Kilda overused the ball a little bit too much. St Kilda won the clearances by 7, all those coming at the stoppages. But West Coast outscored them 40-24 in scores from stoppages. Both teams above average turnovers. West Coast outscored them here as well, 68-50 in scores from turnovers. Off their first win of the season, the Eagles have a tough trip over to Adelaide to play the Crows. Their last 2 trips over there have been awful. We'll get to that in the preview though for that game. And St Kilda have a tough match this week playing Gold Coast, who are returning back from Darwin, but that game will be down in Melbourne, so home game for St Kilda. So that's my look at the games from last weekend. Interesting round coming up this weekend. Quite a few good games, especially this Geelong Western Bulldogs game to kick the round off. Carlton versus GWS, important game for both sides. Hawthorn versus Brisbane, top 4 clash between those two sides. And as I said, Hawthorn have a very good record against the Lions, with majority of their games being played down in Melbourne. And then what's an important game for both Melbourne and Sydney? The loser of that game, season looks close to being over, and both of those teams trying to make somewhat of a fight back at this stage. Looking at the ladder, Collingwood sit half a game clear of the Brisbane Lions, who are then half a game clear of the Suns and Hawthorn. Western Bulldogs lead a group of 3 behind Adelaide and Geelong, so the Bulldogs ahead of those on percentage after a few big wins. Then the team's fighting for the last spot in the 8 as it currently stands, GWS, Fremantle. And then you've got 5 teams here all sitting on 16 points, all definitely need a win at least 2 of their next 3 games to make sure they're staying in contention as we go into the second half of the season. Really appreciate you guys watching and following along on the channel. My goal with these videos is to make you the best possible AFL better I can, so that you make money betting on the AFL. If you want to learn more strategies how you can do that, check out the Best Bets membership through the link in the description. That's where you can see further in-depth previews of games, also have access to all the tools I use to research matches and find bets. So definitely worthwhile checking that out if you want to make money betting on the AFL this season. So far we're going at over 60% on the bets that we're having each week, so showing a good profit on the AFL. Thanks guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video where we'll preview all the games coming up this weekend.